Hello everybody, my name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog. This is a video game deep dive review podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. My guest today is a friend of the show, host of Indie Quest and Polykill podcasts, joining me straight from the void. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to talk about a very strange game.
That's right. Yeah, and not one that I hear a lot of people talking about. Sometimes I'll hear it pop up here and there on other shows, but not like, a dedicated episode like we're doing here today. That game is Void Stranger today, which is a puzzle adventure game developed and published by System Erasure for PC in 2023. System Erasure is a Finnish two-person development team of Eero Latinen and Antti Ukkola. And I hope the pronunciations are halfway correct. Apologies if not. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, first of all, thank you for stopping by. Here's how spoilers work in the podcast, and it is an important one for a game like Void Stranger. So we're going to set up what the gameplay is like. We're going to set up the basis of the story in Void Stranger. But this is a game that has a lot of secrets and a lot of things to discover for yourself. And we're going to kind of talk about the potential for what you might find or how you might find it, but we're not going to spoil specifics of how you do stuff and what you'll find exactly. We'll just give you a little bit of a tease, we'll say. So you can check down in the show notes for a timestamp for when spoilers begin for Void Stranger, and until then, consider yourself safe. So what is Void Stranger? If you're listening and you don't know what this game is, we have prepared some quick pitches for the top of the show. I say Void Stranger is a sokoban puzzle game with an RPG story. Steve, what would you say?
I called it a tile-based puzzler that demands patience and rewards curiosity.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree with all of that. We will certainly talk about how much patience this game demands in a little bit.
Yes.
Speaking of patience, I suppose I played this for 27 hours across PC and Steam Deck. I played it actually. So we'll talk. This game was so compelling for me. I had a really hard time not playing this. So I played on Steam Deck originally because I like, an indie, a sprite-based game. They feel right at home on Steam Deck. But I actually played it so much that my hands hurt. So I switched to PC so that I could play with just the keyboard. And that helped me finish out the game. But I switched back and forth. The cloud saves worked perfectly. Everything was good. 27 hours. How about you? How long did your playthrough take you?
I think all things told, I clocked in around 35 hours. Mm-hmm. And all that was on PC. Although, like you, this game did really get its claws into me to the point where I didn't pull the trigger, but I was literally surfing the Steam Deck page thinking, do I just buy one right now? Because I was like, my setup is set up in a way where my computer is in a different room from sort of the general place I spend my time. And I was like, I can't go all the way to this other room and hold myself off to play. I need a Steam Deck now.
Okay. I was going to say you have this separate cordoned off area and you're like, I can't just be in there all the time. I have to be around the house a little bit, right?
Exactly. I need to show the 6 or 7 other rooms some love.
Yeah, exactly. So we always kind of start the show off with our histories with Void Stranger. I don't quite remember why it is we settled on this game in particular as the one that you were going to come on the show and do. So were you aware of this game before we had talked about doing the podcast here? How'd you hear about this?
Yeah. So on one of my podcasts, Polykill, we have a segment on that where we just kind of look at upcoming releases for the next couple of weeks. And literally on name alone, I was like, oh, I'd never heard of that. What's that? And I clicked into it and I was like, oh, that's cool. It's got a nice, initially I thought it's going to be kind of like a Game Boy retro throwback sort of, a much more light puzzler, I guess is what I anticipated it being. And then I saw that it is from the same studio that had done Zero Ranger, which is a game I'd not played, but I knew had a reputation of being quite good. Mm-hmm. And so that intrigued me on it, and I decided to pick it up right away. It helped that right around that time, I would say that there's a certain subset of people I follow on Twitter and in other spaces, Spelunky obsessed type people that were really saying nice things about this game. And so I decided to play it. I actually decided to stream the first 2 or 3 hours of the game, which I think was actually a pretty terrible decision. I don't think this game streams all that well for a number of reasons that we'll probably get into, but even just the base level puzzles intrigued me enough to want to keep playing. Then I got distracted for a long time. And then when you and I were talking about potential games, you mentioned Void Stranger, and I was like, I think this might be my only chance, my only excuse to put the time in to go revisit it.
There we go. I love it when that happens, when the guest is like, this game would have just sat there if we hadn't, had this as a possibility. So that's cool. I like that. For me personally, I had never heard of this game. I'd never heard of Zero Ranger before. I'd never heard of this studio at all until on an episode of Acts of the Blood God, one of the hosts or guests were talking about it. It was an episode with Reb Valentine, and it was either her or Eric from Acts of the Blood God talking about this game. And the way whoever it was described it, the sokoban puzzles plus a JRPG story, they said, I was like, well, that sounds cool. Like I was like, I like the idea of sokoban puzzles, and I played a lot of Zelda games. I've pushed some blocks in my time. But then the idea of like, okay, you're going to do puzzles and then you're going to get a story. And they describe the story as, epic and full of twists and turns. And I was like, okay, you're speaking my language here. So it went on the wish list. I eventually bought it when it was on a Steam sale, and then it just sat there for a while. And when we started up our backlog resolutions list for my Discord server for 2024, I made sure to put it on my list. Like, this is really intriguing. I need to, even if it's peer pressuring myself, I need to get that little extra thing to play it. So that's why I started playing it. And like you, I streamed the first couple hours of this game, and I also did not enjoy streaming it.
Yeah.
I felt a lot of pressure doing puzzles with people watching, and it wasn't like a stream where people were like in the chat. If I remember, there wasn't that many people watching anyway, but like the idea that I'm stuck on a puzzle and like everyone could be just tuning in and just watching for a minute and be like, this fucking guy, and then getting out of the stream or whatever, just didn't feel right. So I never streamed it again, but I did get like super hooked on it after that. And then for our quick opening thoughts here at the top, we've both already mentioned how compelling we found this game. And this is a really interesting one to talk about. And when we talk about the experience of playing this, we talk about how addicting it is and how satisfying it is to make progress. But it's also like very difficult and very unfair and frustrating, and it does not respect your time at all. And
none. 0%.
Zero respect for your time. And that's like a thing that so many people say that they value in video games. But like, I was so compelled by the secrets I found, and like, this is one of those games where you'll figure one thing out, but you'll find 3 other loose ends to pull on. And so all of those things really hooked me. I couldn't stop playing this, despite how hostile it felt at times. I did get to a point where I needed to use a guide to beat the puzzles, but I never once considered just like, let me go look at the ending on YouTube or something like that. I wanted to like go through it and see the process and all of that myself. So I really enjoyed this game, but I really hated it sometimes too. And it's one of those games that like, for the top like 5 to 10% of people who like this game, this might be your favorite game that you've ever played. It's like that kind of like satisfying, and like you'll go crazy trying to put all these secrets together. It's just like there's a level of hostility for me that's going to keep it from being a game like that. I respect the hell out of this game. It's kind of like Tunic. Tunic, I thought, was just too difficult for its own good, and it kept it for me from being one of those all-timers. And I put Void Stranger in that category too, but I do think this is a really cool game.
Yeah, very much so. It is. It makes me glad that we are like 20 years past all like review or discussions of games requiring a numerical score, because I could not imagine having to assign a number to the experience of playing this game
Yeah.
when one half of your time is spent, well, I guess it's kind of split into thirds. The first third is it's you enjoying these actually very well crafted puzzles that do a lot to like layer on each other and add new mechanics. And they do a good job adding complexity without ever like overwhelming the player. You know, the screens all still stick onto one PC monitor and things like that. And then your second third is like all this sort of intrigue, and you're wondering, you know, what's going on, and you're just kind of like making mental notes of things as you go along. And then the last third is you redoing some part of that first third because the game has, you know, through a single action you've taken, undone, in some cases, literal hours of your progress. Yeah. And you're like, well, I had 2 hours to play games tonight, and I'm done now, and I made no progress at all. And yet I know tomorrow I'm going to boot this thing back up, very determined to go in and do it again. So yeah, I'm really the intellectual side of me that respects my own time, and then the gut side of me that just wants to see stuff that's cool as hell are in a little bit of conflict on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a game that contains multitudes for sure. But good thing we have a podcast ahead of us to dig into all of those multitudes. So we're going to listen to some of the really awesome music from Void Stranger, and when we come back, we're going to set up what it's like to play the game. So Void Stranger begins with a character kind of walking toward this pit opening in the ground. At the beginning of the game, you are asked to create a brand where you'll get like a grid, and you get to design a sigil for yourself. They call it a brand in the game. So you do that, then you see your character walk to the edge of this pit and then jump in, and it's puzzle time. We'll get into the story a little bit later, but since this game puts you in gameplay first with zero story context whatsoever, we'll talk about what it's like to play it first. So, sokoban style puzzles. Sokoban, for those who don't know, are block pushing puzzles like in Zelda or the game Sokoban. But is this a type of puzzle that you enjoy straight off before we dig too deep into it?
It is, although I would say maybe more than almost any other type of game, I hit a mental fatigue with them pretty often. So when they hit, they really hit for me. So stuff like Baba Is You and things like that, or like some of my favorites. But almost always, I feel like these games hit a point where like the levels designed for everyone end and the levels designed for Sokoban sickos kick in. And you're like, okay, I think, you know, I have not, you know, I didn't take the right degree track in college to be able to handle these puzzles, and so I'm just going to have to tap out here. But I was very much enjoying them as they came up in this one. I have to say, I think they did a good job.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like, I really like the idea of them, and I like, you know, anytime a Zelda puzzle involves this kind of thing, I'm into it. Baba Is You is another one. I like that game. I did not get anywhere close to beating that game, but I really enjoyed, you know, the first couple islands in that game. So we say Sokoban, and there are some actual block pushing puzzles in this game, but that's not actually like the meat and potatoes of the puzzling in Void Stranger. Most of it involves this magic scepter that you pick up that lets you pick up floor tiles and then put them down on any empty space. And so a lot of the puzzles in Void Stranger involve you walk into a room, you see the exit staircase somewhere on the screen, and you need to use this scepter to pick up and put down tiles to get yourself to the exit. And like you said earlier, they introduce new mechanics, they introduce, you know, enemies, they introduce all kinds of things that layer on top of each other so that it is actually, like you said, kind of those thirds of the game. The first third, I was like, I'm really good at this. And then the second third, I was like, this is tough. I wonder how much longer this is going to go. And then the hardest puzzles in this game are so incredibly complex. It was like I could have dedicated my entire summer and fall to figuring it out, but I decided I was just going to look at a guide instead. It got to that point for sure.
Yeah, very much so. And it's interesting because the pacing is a little different from other sokobans that I've played, and that goes a little into some of the mystery stuff in the game, but you'll be playing through and you'll do some like what to me feels like a very hard level. And then there'll be like one or two just sort of gimme levels, either like literal gimme levels where you just have to walk to the right or something, or a puzzle that feels so painfully simple that you wonder, like, did this get put out of order? Like, did they intend for this to be one of the first 10 or so? And so that helped me a little bit to give me like a little bit of a free win, a little mental reset, because the whole point in the game is you're descending deeper into the void. And so you have like a level counter that is constantly ticking up for like how deep underground you are. And there's something to every now and again the game giving me like 3 or 4 just sort of free levels, and I see like, oh, I rolled into the 70s now. I feel pretty good.
Yeah. There are like several different types of those. Like you said, like kind of gimme puzzles. There are some where it's still actually a puzzle. It's just way easier than the room you just did. And those, they make you feel good about yourself, and they kind of give you a breather from, using your entire brain on some of these puzzles like it took me. And then some of them have other purposes. And I think that's a good like segue into just kind of touching on the fact that this is one of those games like a Tunic or Animal Well or something like that, where there is a lot more to this game than meets the eye. And even in your first, 50, 70, 100 rooms that you do, there's a lot more hidden in plain sight, stuff that you just don't have any context for. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do, like weird sequences of events to get to. It's a game that really pushes you to ask questions, experiment, pull on those threads. Because like you said, you're going to go through these rooms and you're going to be solving puzzles, but there's also going to be stuff where you're like, what is that? What happens when I mess with that thing? Or what happens if I jump in this pit? Or stuff like that. So it's a game where there's a lot more than just picking up tiles and putting them down.
Yeah, and sometimes even not just things that are sort of like hidden in plain sight, but sometimes the game will have you do something, like you'll interact with something in one of these levels, and it just kind of naturally triggers in your brain, like, that felt like it should have been important, but then the game just keeps moving onwards and forwards, and you're like, okay, it's weird that you presented that to me, and then now we're just kind of moving on. And so even if you're not in like full-blown discovery mode, there's this little thing, like this itch in the back of your brain that's like, I don't know, it feels like you're asking me questions that you're then kind of ignoring my answers to. What's going on there?
Yeah, and you can't go back either. Once you go down a staircase to the next level, you cannot go back up. So those seeds will be planted, and then you, like, I don't think it's a huge spoiler to say, like, you can restart and, start from the top of the tower and go back. You'll be doing some of these puzzles a lot if you choose to play and explore everything there is to explore. So there is, like, that's a double-edged coin, right? Two-sided coin, double-edged sword. Yeah, I'm mixing up my metaphors. You get like the satisfaction of going through places you already know, looking for new things, but you are also doing the same puzzles, sometimes dozens of times. And there is, so like on one side, there is that exploration and discovery. On the other side, there is intense tedium and punishments for making mistakes and hostility. This game's full of all of that.
And I would say sometimes it's not even a punishment for making a mistake. Sometimes the game has asked you, like, be curious. And then sometimes the reward for your curiosity is them not literally, but almost literally saying, I have wiped your memory card, start from scratch again. Now you know not to do that next time. Or maybe you should, who's to say, but enjoy the next hour and a half.
Yeah, definitely lots of points where I felt like progress was erased at the drop of a hat. Like,
yeah.
I'm just going to make up floor numbers here, but like, let's say I'm on floor 176 and I do something that I felt like the game was kind of pushing me to try, and I get reset back to level 1, and that feels bad. You have gained knowledge from it, and you'll probably get back to floor 176 faster than it took you the first time, but it still feels bad to have to do those levels beforehand, and especially before you know more and more of the game's secrets. This is a game that is just full of, like we said, tedium and disrespect for the time that you spend playing the game. It feels like it breaks a lot of rules that, game designers try not to break anymore.
Yeah, very much. It reminds me of, not to be defensive of a different game, but one of my favorites of all time, probably my favorite, is Outer Wilds. And people have a lot of, I think, fair complaints about not enjoying the loop mechanic in that game. And having to redo a certain amount of progress. But this feels like the actual hostile version of what people are like trying to get at when they describe that game. Like, this is truly a developer that is like looking you in your eyes and saying, we made a great game, but you have to like basically prove that you're willing to put in the time to get to it. Because the first time you get reset, or the first time that you get back to that first floor, at least for me, I went down like 2-3 levels thinking like, oh, this is going to be a little bit of like a sleight of hand or a trick or something. Like they're going to be like, oh, look, we faked you out. And then you realize, no, I literally am just playing it again all the way through. And, I remember plenty of the solutions and, how some of these mechanics work, but some of these floors were tough, and I'm not going to remember, on floor, again, making up a number 85, what the specific, series of 50 inputs I put was. So a lot of these I'm kind of having to resolve the puzzle again as I re-explore.
Yeah, it is kind of like the developers just kind of like staring you in the eyes and being like, how much do you really want it? Like it's it's like there's a lot here for you if you're willing to put in the work and the time, but we're going to fuck with you along the way. And like it kind of makes me think like, I think a lot of people will be compelled to like keep going and explore to a certain point. I think the game goes beyond that point for a lot of people. And I've heard a lot of people who like are puzzle people who are like pen and paper, take notes while playing games type of people who are like, they're in it. They want to discover stuff like this. And some of those people I've talked to have just been like, no, Void Stranger just does too much to like, the juice is not worth the squeeze for me. And for me, I made the decision, like, if that happens to me, I'm just going to check a guide for a solution to a puzzle instead of spending 10 minutes trying to figure out this one room of hundreds that are in the game. It's going to be a really individualized like decision for each person who tries this game. Like, how much are you willing to put up with?
Yeah, I did something similar. I set sort of like, I guess, my own moral boundaries around like how far I would allow myself to push myself or be pushed before I would consult a guide. And I think 99% of people at some point will probably hit the either use a guide or stop playing Void Stranger spot as they go through. But I was very tempted pretty early on to be like, okay, I'm gonna need someone to just tell me the answers to these.
Yep. So we've established there is a lot of bullshit in this game. And, if it were too much, I would have just said, hey, Steve, let's play a different game for the podcast. Yeah. I'm not going to do this. But as we've, both said earlier before we talked about all that, hostility, I didn't quit. I was still super compelled to keep going. So like there is a magic, I think, to this. It like they managed to walk that line, like that fucking like mean football coach type of line or something where they like they're berating you and fucking with you, but all it does is want to make you go harder at it. And like I think that's part of why I would play this game for like 3, 4, 5 hours a day when I was playing it the most. Like I would get reset back to level, 1 or whatever, and I'd be like, fuck this game. And then like 10 minutes later, I'm picking the Steam Deck back up and I'm like, all right, let's get back in there. Like there's a really weird thing that happened in my head.
It's almost like speed running. I don't know. There's something about it where you lose a run and you're like, okay, I just need one more run. And I think in Void Stranger, a lot of that is that even when you're like, taking issue with the structure or, maybe don't agree with the choices that others have made for you. It's all the other component pieces are so good. Mm-hmm. Maybe what I'm saying is that the soundtrack is so good that I'm like, okay, if I just have to listen to this music for another 2 or 3 hours, I'm willing to do that.
Yeah. The soundtrack is good. We'll talk a little bit about the story setup here in a bit, but the story is compelling enough, or was compelling enough for me to want to see what was going to happen the next time I got story stuff. So yeah, that other stuff helps for sure. Also, like, while I was still at the point where I could figure out the puzzles by myself, which is like a huge majority of the game, I want to say, kind of, asterisk. We'll talk about that in the spoiler section. I did think the puzzles themselves were awesome. Like I really enjoyed these puzzles. Every room for a while has a simple solution once you like map out, if you were to look at a guide and it says like, here's what you do to solve this. It's not that complicated, but you really have to become familiar with the mechanics that are available to you and the game's language, the visual language of, what type of tiles there are, what type of statues there are, stuff like that. And I did think that the puzzles themselves were quite fun.
Yeah, I think so too. And it goes back to what I was saying before around about them not adding too much complexity. They know when to like switch up and introduce like a new enemy type or some sort of new tile that you're walking on or something like that. But they don't, like, at least not very quickly, and not really much at all until maybe very late game. They don't suddenly combine like 7 or 8 of those together in a way that is just like visually overwhelming for you to parse. And the puzzles are designed, I think, for you to solve a lot of them in multiple ways. It's not like there is a solution to each floor that you just have to work out and then execute on. There is like some degree of freedom in how you approach the majority of these levels to solve it on your own, as long as you sort of understand the what's and the whys. And that makes, I think, the process more enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure. For the huge majority of the game, puzzle solutions are not like literally up twice, right, press the wand, down twice, press the wand, and if you mess up, if you deviate from that at all, you're fucked. Like it's really never like that until much later in like some optional stuff, I would say.
Yeah.
For everything else, because the way the scepter works, you can pick up a floor tile and put it down. If you put it down in the wrong spot, you just pick it back up again. You're probably fine. So you do have some creativity with how you solve the puzzles. And if you fail, you just jump off the edge, you restart at the same, the staircase of the same puzzle, and you just get back to it with a fresh set of eyes. So like a lot of the puzzles did take me sometimes many tries to figure out, but they did all feel like I could figure it out my own way.
Yeah. And for everything we said at the macro level about how the game maybe doesn't respect your time, at the micro level, they actually do a lot. Like the game has some real kindness to it in, like, if you're just like clicking rapidly and you happen to click over a pit, the game will kind of like do this thing where your character will sort of flail for a second and give you the opportunity basically to step back and be like, oh, I didn't mean to actually do that. So it's, you don't get in that thing where you're like, oh, I see the solution and I'm just going to punch it in and accidentally misclick once. The game it'll stop and it'll be like, hey, you probably didn't mean to do this, right? You have 2 seconds to fix your mistake.
Yeah, for sure. Very generous, like, coyote time, or your character has really, really good balance. They're not going to fall in a pit right away. They have some time to catch themselves, for sure. So, anything else about like the experience of playing the game? I guess one thing that just popped to mind is different parts of the we'll say dungeon that you're going through with all the puzzles have different puzzle themes, and then they layer on top of each other. The enemies that you see in the puzzles all like have a role to play in the way you solve the puzzle itself. It's not like a game where it's like, okay, there's a bunch of bears in this room, I need to kill the bears, then do the puzzle. The bears are part of the puzzle, and it's interesting, like the different gimmicks that they throw in there for enemies and hazards and things like that as you go.
Yeah, very rarely is it I have to solve this puzzle and the enemies are just providing like tension to try to make that more difficult. It's almost always, like you were saying, it's almost always the enemies are part of the solution, or sort of just serving as like another obstacle for you to overcome when you see the objective in front of you.
Yeah, for sure. So was there anything else about the kind of gameplay experience to mention here before we move on?
Only that I think that it does have very good pacing because of the way you were saying I'd say every 10, 20 floors or so, they split it up with some story section for you, or the opportunity to stop and take a break. And so that makes it a little more like, I'll just do one more puzzle. Because after you've done like 15 in a row, I'm probably pretty close to getting a little bit more story. That's a little bit more incentive for me to push on just a little bit farther. And after that, they're probably going to do some sort of like soft mechanical reset in terms of introducing something new and move my brain in a different direction. So I think that contributed to my experience of always playing this game for like 2 or 3 hours at a time, because it is sort of like drip feeding you little rewards at just the right interval.
Yeah, for sure. Like every 20 to 25 rooms or something like that, you'll come across a rest room, and in the room there's a tree, and your character can go up and take a nap by the tree. And if you choose to do that, the game will put you into story scenes. Or actually what will happen is it will close the game. So that's a good like quitting point too. If you are just kind of like pacing this out, you can play this game pretty naturally for like, a half hour at a time, or however long it takes you to get to the next tree. And then the next time you boot the game up, it will start you with a story scene. So we're going to take this opportunity to listen to a bit of music. We'll come back and we'll kind of set up what the story in Void Stranger is about. The story in Void Stranger begins as a kind of a fairy tale. You play as a woman named Lady Grey, also known as Grey the Destroyer for her fighting ability. Lady Grey is the lady-in-waiting for the belligerent Princess Lily, who's known as the Demon Princess in her castle. She's kind of like a helper for Lily. They go on a journey. They are going to go meet a possible husband for Lily. On the journey, they get ambushed by bandits. Grey kicks the shit out of some of them, but then more bandits come, and they're saved by a valiant and noble prince. And so we meet this prince character. That's all the story content spoilers that I'm going to give for now. I will just say that the story follows Grey and Lily throughout their life, and takes some pretty crazy twists and turns along the way. And at designated points in the story, it will kick you out of the story, and then you'll wake up back, under the tree in the puzzle dungeon. So they always pick good, little cliffhanger spots for you where you want to know what's going to go on in the story, but now you're back in the puzzle thing. So they work together really well. Like, I want to know what's going on in the story, but now I got to go do these puzzles. And if I'm super intrigued by the puzzles, then I'm going to want to push through, tough puzzles or actual bullshit to get to story content. But also the puzzle part and the story part do intertwine in a way as you go through. And I won't say much more than that. But I was really intrigued and compelled by the story aspect of it too.
Yeah, same. It was interesting to me at first because it's like you're being told the story of a different game almost, because of the way they sort of non sequitur just drop you in to these levels, and you start and you're seeing this and you're like, oh, I feel like I'm getting some backstory, but I'm not really getting much relation to the actual gameplay. Obviously, as the story progresses, that changes a little bit and you get a little bit more of a context of the broader picture of things. But it was enough for me. It was probably not my primary motivator initially because I was more hooked on the puzzle side, but it did do a good job of like pushing me to that next tree.
Yeah. Definitely, like, there's a prize waiting for you when you make it to the next tree. Even if the thing that you want the most is the puzzles, you at least have a reason to, because like stopping at the trees is optional, and I never passed it up because I wanted to see what was going on in the story for sure. Did you end up enjoying the story now that we, you know, of course not going to spoil what happens, but like overall, did you find it to be entertaining?
I did. To me, it's the kind of story where I actually ended up really liking it. And like in the minute to minute, I was like, oh, this is awesome. But if someone came up to me afterwards and I was like, oh man, that was so good. And they said, oh, really explain it to me. I'd be like, ooh, I don't know. I don't know that I can. You just have to trust me that the parts that I did understand were cool. And there's probably connective tissue I don't see in the other parts.
Yeah, there is a lot going on for sure. And I kind of wrote here that this is one of those Pepe Sylvia corkboard type of stories, because it's not only that like the story is complex, but the way they tell you the story is completely out of order. There's a bunch of pieces that you're not sure how they connect until like much later. So like it starts out as this very simple fairy tale, but the way the story progresses is not a simple fairy tale in the slightest. That provides you with more of that intrigue, but also, you know, if you are the type of person who wants to like take notes and, you know, put together characters and their relationships and stuff like that, I think there's a lot of fun to be had piecing this story together too.
Yeah, I pretty much ended up writing down like a little synopsis of every time I got any sort of story cutscene, because I learned pretty fast that I would basically not be able to hold it all in my head at one time. So I was like, I should at least write some of these things down so that when characters get mentioned, you know, some of them have 2, 3, 4 names that they go by. When they get mentioned, I have like almost an index to look up to be like, this is who they're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Also of note is the way the game is presented with, you know, visuals, music, and things like that. Visuals are credited to Antti Ukkola, who's one of the, you know, the 2 people primarily developing the game. It's kind of a striking style, and it's weird to say now that this is a striking style, but black and white Game Boy type aesthetic, pixel art, and really, really reminded me of like a Link's Awakening type of visual style here. I love this like from the second I saw this.
Yeah, same. Something about the little almost chibi sprite of your main character and how that contrasted with like the nice, beautiful full pixel art version that you'd see in some cutscenes and stuff. It reminded me a lot of like a Final Fantasy Adventure or something. One of those early RPGs on the original Game Boy where you could tell that they had these just like cute, relatable approximations, but then every now and again they want to show you like the really cool battle art or something of one of the characters you're fighting.
Yeah, it's one of those where it's like, I think that the puzzle sections of the game, and maybe even the story sections where it's still in that same Game Boy art style, like you get the feeling like this could actually run on a Game Boy, like the way that it looks and the way it's presented. But then you have these huge, nice, like pixel art portraits during the story scenes. You're like, that they couldn't do that on a Game Boy. Those are too nice. They're really cool though. It's still black and white, but they managed to express like a lot of they're like lightly animated too, like very lightly animated, but they express a lot of personality with, you know, the way the characters are drawn, the way their faces, the facial expressions are, and things like that. So when you see Lady Grey's face, or you see the princess's face, or the prince, or any number of the other things that come up in the story, it's always really cool. I loved the blown up, we'll say, pixel art as well.
Yeah. And at first I thought that I would get a little tired of it being entirely black and white. And you can go into the menus and you can change between like 5 or 6 different preset color palettes. And I played around with them a little bit, but I don't know, something about like the tone of this game, it felt more appropriate in black and white. So I would do a few floors in like the violet color palette. And then I ultimately ended up just going back and sticking with the black and white.
Yeah. So question for you, since a lot of it is in, like we said, that black and white Game Boy type pixel art aesthetic, did you feel like it was always readable as far as like what you need to interact with and what different things mean in the puzzle sections?
To me it was, but like barely, because there is a couple like objects or things that you interact with that are subtly different from one another, and that subtle difference is important in terms of like how you'll interact with those things. And to the point where in like the notes I had taken little screenshots of like multiple objects, and I had like blown them up and labeled them as to what they were and what I had discovered about them. So I didn't ever have a readability problem, but I could always sense that like ever so slightly different, like a little bit smaller pixel art or something, and I would probably lose track of things. But how was it for you?
Yeah, it was around the same thing, where for most of the game, I understood, it's like I said earlier, it's like you do have to get the kind of visual language of the game and how it teaches you, because there's not going to be a text box that says like this thing does this. You just have to, fuck around and find out. So you do need to learn like just based on the way things look. And for most of the game, there was like no issues whatsoever. There are things that you have to learn as you go for like very late game things that, like you said, they're different, but like they're as similar but different as like this pixel art style will allow. So like if I didn't squint and focus, I could easily mistake one thing for the other, for sure. But that's late in the game. It's something that I feel like a lot of people aren't even going to get to the point where that might be an issue. But it did kind of rear its ugly head like once or twice. You'll have like a line of statues, and one of the statues will do something bad to you. And if you're just kind of like glossing over like, okay, line of statues, you might have something bad happen just because, that one didn't stick out like a sore thumb,
Yeah, we'll stick a pin in that until spoiler talk comes, because
for sure.
I'm pretty sure we're concerned about the same issue.
For sure. Yeah. Something that we're not concerned about is the music in Void Stranger. So the music is credited to Eero Lahtinen, and the Game Boy visual aesthetic rules the way the game looks, but not the soundtrack. Like, this is not one of those where it's like, this is going to be an authentic Game Boy game. There are some chiptune songs in here, but there's a lot of piano and like synth and stuff like that in the soundtrack as well. And this is one of those things where if the soundtrack wasn't fucking stellar, I might have quit playing this game, but the soundtrack is fucking stellar.
Yeah, extremely good, very energetic, and like has pretty big range too. And there's a lot of music in the game. When you get to one of those like different sections, maybe right after one of those trees and after those story bits, most like chunks of floors as they group together naturally have their own music.
Yeah.
And so you'll enter into a new area, and the songs are all very cleverly composed where the first, 5 notes, the first 2 seconds come in and like immediately give you a sense of what's going on. And so you'll hear just that tiny little riff at the beginning and you'll be like, all right, yeah, here we go. I'm down.
Yeah. And it's really important that there's a bunch of range, and the songs are quite long actually, which I think is really good. Like they're a lot of like the, like you said, like the zone music for, this zone, that zone, this zone, they're like 5 minutes long at least on the soundtrack, which is really important because you're going to be spending a lot of time, maybe bashing your head against a puzzle, or you're going to spend a lot of time doing the same puzzles over and over again. And if you have a song with like a 45-second loop, it would start to get really annoying, I think. But these are, a lot of them are like actual, songs with different, structures, and there's, bridges and chorus and things like that. And there's breakdowns in the middle of some of these. And there's a lot of variety to what's, going on in your head. And I couldn't get these songs out of my head after I stopped playing. It's maybe part of the reason I would be like drawn back to the game so much, where I'd be like, I can't get the song out of my head. I might as well just go play the game instead of like walking around myself going da 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 da.
Yeah, I mean, it would be I would, I'd end my session and I'd walk away like, I can't believe that just happened. And then I'd immediately go in the other room and turn on the Bluetooth speaker and I'd put the soundtrack on Spotify and listen to it. And I feel like there's like a general design rule. Again, another one that they're just breaking in the way that they design this game is, for puzzle games, the music, I think, tends to try to just get out of your way. Like, I think a lot of puzzle games want the music to be like either really light or really low key, or just like not a lot of density, because they don't want anything, pulling extra cognitive load off of you while you're trying to solve the puzzles. But that is not the case here. Nope. It's like vaguely almost chiptune prog rock in a lot of cases. They're just going.
Yep. There's a lot to them. And so like, I'll give a couple examples and like what I feel like the kind of mood that they're putting across and some of the instrumentation to kind of back up what you just said, because it's totally true. The first area song is called Void Symphony, and I probably already used it in the episode, but it's like, it's got this weird sinister sound to it as you're going into this strange dungeon, but it has like this really heroic melody that's playing as you're setting off on your quest. And this is the zone 1 music and things like that. And it's like you said, the game's not afraid to have this big heroic melody playing while you're trying to figure out, this is level 1. You're trying to figure out how to play the game because there's no real tutorial here, but it's not afraid. It's just like, nah, this is an adventure. You're starting an adventure right now. A couple other songs that I mentioned, one called Affection Air, which I think is my favorite song in the soundtrack, has this super clangy bass line that's going the whole song, and then these repeating arpeggios in the background, and then like a really sad piano breakdown in the middle of the song. And it's in a, not the hardest level, but in a pretty challenging part in the dungeon. So you're going to hear the song many, many times. And a lot of these just made a huge impression.
Yeah, they all, well, not all, but a lot of them seem to have this simultaneous balance of energizing and pumping you up and pushing you forward, and also like a little discomfort or a little unease or a little sadness. And that, I think, unease is probably a word that permeates a lot of the game. And so the music is doing a lot of the lifting in that, but a lot of them have qualities of both, and like how you listen to it and how you read it is going to give you one side or the other or both at the same time. Yeah.
And a lot of like intrigue in the soundtrack as well as a game that's pushing you to explore and use your brain and things like that too. So I really have like nothing but compliments about the music and the presentation, other than a couple of sprites that are a little bit too similar. Like for all the, whining or whatever about, bullshit or hostile design earlier, like when you get to like the actual experience of playing this, you're doing some pretty fun puzzles, and like this just crazy good soundtrack is going in the background, and it adds a lot to the experience. I think if the music was laid back, like in a lot of puzzle games, like thinking of like the Talos Principle or something like that, this game would be demonstrably worse, I think.
Yeah, it's a big part of what gives it its very unique vibe. One of the biggest compliments I can give the soundtrack is just that it doesn't sound like anything else I've ever really listened to. Like, I can't think of another game that is doing the Void Stranger thing.
Yeah, because it's kind of tough to pin down. I don't think I have the vocabulary to pin down what is the Void Stranger thing. It's it's a pretty eclectic soundtrack, and they're not afraid to bring in lots of different sounds into it. So yeah, it's real good. All right, so before we get into spoilers, let's wrap up the non-spoiler section of the show by first talking about, any closing thoughts. You want to bring some things together, or just answer the question, who would you recommend play Void Stranger?
So I feel like maybe some of our discussions skewed a little bit like trying to scare people off, but I actually have the opposite feeling where I think almost everybody should check this game out. It is really cool, and despite those things kind of like maybe the wounds feeling a little bit fresh in some cases, it's the like excitement to get back into it is definitely my takeaway as I finish the game. So who I would recommend it to? Well, one, anyone who's patient, and if you're the type of person that appreciates games like Animal Well or Tunic, or if you're the type of person that appreciates games where people recommend it to you and then they won't tell you why, like it's in hushed tones that they're talking about it. If you're like me and that's catnip for you, then definitely check out Void Stranger.
Yeah, well, we've already done 50 minutes about it, so like we already can tell. I don't really buy the, I recommend this game to you, but I can't tell you anything type of recommendation. It personally doesn't work that well for me, but there are always things that you can talk about. And it's kind of like you said, unfortunately, like a lot of the talk in the gameplay section was about, how fun the puzzles are, but also how directly hostile to you the game feels sometimes. And that's just something that not a lot of games do nowadays. There's a lot of smoothing out those rough edges, and I wouldn't even call them rough, just edges in this game. There's just really rough things that this game does. It's part of the core experience. So like, I think when recommending it, you have to be aware that that is what this game is doing. You have to be aware that that's part of the experience of playing Void Stranger. And it's, I didn't look up the Steam achievements, but I would guess that a lot of people probably didn't finish the game or didn't get to one way of finishing the game, I guess we'll say. Like I think it's going to put a lot of people off. So you have to be aware of that. But you are also able to draw your own line for, when does it become too much? When am I going to either tap out or check a guide? And until you get to that point, it's a really fucking cool game. And then even if you do get to that point, like me, and you decide to go the route of following a guide for, maybe you look up an answer to a specific question, or maybe you just go to a guide that's like, I would have like the guide up on one side and the game up on the other side, and just read the guide and type in, on the keyboard, up, left, up, Z, up, left, up, like that to get through the hardest puzzles. I got through that because I was so compelled to see where this game went, and I knew I wouldn't be satisfied by just watching it on YouTube. And I'm glad that I did. So it's a really weird one where, I do recommend that most people check it out, but I know that there's a lot of people listening to this who are hearing what we're saying, and you're thinking like, that doesn't sound like something I would like. And I don't think we're being like over dramatic about it. Like, this is a mean game sometimes, and a lot of people are not going to like what it's doing.
Yeah, very much so. But if you're someone who, can go in knowing that, and you tell yourself the first time the game kicks me in the shins, I'm out, you'll still have probably several hours of like good, well-made puzzles. So you can at least appreciate those.
And great music, for sure.
Yeah.
And there are the sickos out there, I know you because you've been on my podcast before, who have a game, like you said, kick them in the shins, and you're like, oh, that was good. Let's go. I can't wait to see what the next one is. So there are people who enjoy like when a game will push back on you a little bit too. So if that's you, 100% try Void Stranger. So recommendations. It is a very cool game, despite, us talking about bad times that we had along the way. There were plenty of like great times too, as well. And in the spoiler section, we're going to spend quite a bit of time, I think, like talking about a bunch of cool discoveries that we made and like really getting deeper into why this game was so hard to put down. Just things we can't say right now. We're saving those as sometimes happens on the show. So before we get to that point, let's do our housekeeping, starting with you, Steve. Like I said, at the top of the show, you are on the Indie Quest podcast. You're on the Polykill podcast. So tell people about those and where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find either of the shows at polymedianetwork.com. Indie Quest is a show, imagine kind of like the fast food version of your show, essentially. It's me and a couple of my co-hosts, each bring an indie game to the show, kind of give it its run through, its breakdown, its component pieces, and then give it a recommendation on what we call the quest log. So it's just a giant running list that we maintain of all the games we've ever brought to the show. And basically, do we give them a thumbs up or 2 thumbs up is how it breaks down. We call it the main quest or the side quest, but anything on that list is worth checking out. So if you're a fan of indie stuff, you can go check out that one. And then Polykill is a podcast about beating your game backlog. So again, very relevant to folks here. We talk about games that we're currently playing, games that we've finished. We solicit all the games from our listener base and community and the games that they've finished and talk about the games that they're working on in the last couple of weeks. So it's just kind of like a big community opportunity to get to the games that we've been putting off for a long time. So yeah, come check out on either of those shows. Hope you enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Indie Quest, and like that's the reason, I think one of the reasons Void Stranger was something I suggested to you, because I know you're always looking out for indies. So Indie Quest is a great show. I recommend that people check that out. And I will be checking out Polykill after hearing the pitch as someone who's, working toward making dents in the backlog, we'll say. And you have some fun streams too, if people want to check out like some retro game streams from time to time. Always enjoy when I'm able to pop in and see those. So I'll put links down in the show notes to your shows, your Twitch channel, and people can come check you out. It's good stuff.
Yeah, appreciate that.
And for this show, same ways to support the show. As always, if you have enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, likes and comments on YouTube. All of those things will help people find the show. So if anyone out there is looking for a Void Stranger podcast, they might find this one, and that's what we want. So that's a big help. You can join the Discord community, which is a great group of people in there, always talking about the games we're playing. And, if you've played Void Stranger and want to come in and chat about it, we would love to have you come in and probably tell us about some of the stuff that we missed after we get through the spoiler section here. You can also listen to my other podcast. It's called A Top 3 Podcast, where we do top 3 lists. And last but not least, if you want to support monetarily, you can do that at patreon.com/realdavejackson, where every patron starting at $2 a month gets to vote in a monthly poll for games I do on the show. You get some bonus episodes, and there's some other treats on there as well. So with all of that being said, we are going to take a break, and when we come back, it will be full spoiler time for Void Stranger. All right, before we get to spoilers for Void Stranger, I want to give the customary thank yous, and I'll let you know what's going on the Patreon this month. The Tales from the Way backlog episode for the $5 and up patrons is about Batman Returns for the Super Nintendo. We have a Batman episode coming up on the main show later this month, and we have a Batman episode since apparently only Batman does games set at Christmas time. Anyway, that's over there on the Patreon. Also, want to say thank you to the patrons who help support the show. Big shout out to Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Zulgeek, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Ficori, Jill, Jeff, formerly Jerf, Kieran, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Randall, Jake Martin, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, and a couple of new patrons. Welcome in David Stecco and Steve. Thank you both for your support, and thank you to everybody. You can be like them. Go to patreon.com/realdavejackson, where you'll get lots of perks, and even at the free tier, you'll be able to listen to episodes a few days early. How about that? Now, with that being said, let's get on to spoilers for Void Stranger. Okay, we're back, and it's full spoiler time for Void Stranger, and a little disclaimer at the top here, actually two. The first one, as always, it's not a linear walk through the game, so if you don't want to be spoiled on Void Stranger, please go play the game or stop listening, I guess. Hopefully, if you don't want to be spoiled, it means you want to play the game, but the show will always be here for you if you want to pause it and go play and come back. The other disclaimer here is that there's a lot in Void Stranger to discover, and the story is tough to parse for me, I guess, in particular. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But so this spoiler section, we're going to talk about cool stuff we found. We might talk about the story a little bit, but I'm not going to try to explain the story to you. That is not my job, and also not what I'm most excited to talk about in the spoiler section here. So what I am most excited to talk about is just the cool stuff that we found, the mysteries that presented themselves to us, and how we either found solutions or didn't, if there's anything that we never figured out. So, Steve, what's something that jumps out at you as something fun that you discovered, or, you know, a mystery?
I'll just take you through my first 2 playthroughs, which I guess is already getting into it, but
yeah.
So like right away or pretty early in the game, you will there's like a life mechanic that exists with these grasshoppers, like these bugs that you find, and every time you fall into a pit, it consumes one of these bugs, and they're basically functioning as lives. And if you run out of them, you can continue on with the game. You're given a choice, basically. It's like a game over screen. They say, do you want to continue or not? If you choose no, it's like, it's very abrupt. Suddenly you're like, okay, they basically like wipe your save file and kick you back to the main menu. Like, no, you really are not continuing with this game.
Yeah, I think they kick you back to Steam. Like, the game shuts down.
Yeah, just harsh. But if you say yes, this little, like, I don't know, bat creature has you eat this apple, and then you can carry on, and in place of what was formerly health, it now just says void. And now you kind of like, it's pretty clear immediately that you've made some sort of like deal with the devil for eternal life, or however you want to call it, because now you can die as much as you want and there's really no consequence to it. And so I pushed down, and I'm assuming you did the same thing. I'm pretty sure you did. Pushed down all the way down into like the early 200s in terms of floors. And the game gives you like something you could consider an ending, but then it basically immediately kicks you back up. And to me, it felt very clear. Like, I kind of had a suspicion the whole time, but it felt pretty obvious that I needed to do this again and not go void or like get void health. I needed to basically get all the way to the bottom without losing all of my lives. And I was able to do that my second run. I'm curious how it went for you.
I think that I probably got like pretty deep into it and then checked a guide because I was sure that that's what I had to do to get like the to finish the gray route, is to get to the end without being voided. The first run, I jumped off the edge in the room where you get the scepter just to see what would happen. And so I was voided immediately in that first run. Yeah, so the second run, because I hadn't figured out the treasure chest trick where you bump the back of a treasure chest and then you can get 3 crickets instead of just 1. I didn't figure that out till much later. So yeah, I think I did check a guide to beat the gray route because I didn't want to do the whole fucking thing again because some of the puzzles at the end are really tough. And I remembered how many times I died the first time, trying to get through them. And like you said, I get back to floor 190 and I don't remember the solution to this thing. Like, It's been hours since I was in this room. So yeah, I think that's the first time I checked a guide just to get to the end to see what would happen. Because I thought that would be the end of the game. So
I was confident it would be too. And I think that for the first 2 playthroughs, I had what I imagine is the developer's sort of intended experience. So I did that first run, made it to the bottom. It was clear I got kind of a bad end. Then my second run, as I was going down with intention to not, go void, I also started to uncover what you learn about the brands. And so, we've talked about in the previous section how these levels are split into different chunks. A lot of the start of those chunks, you'll come into a room that just has this sort of mural on the wall. It's just, it's like a picture made out of squares. And there is no other context. Gray has really no way to interpret it. She's basically just like, that's strange. But you can tell from the way that they've dedicated a whole floor to showing this to you. Obviously, it means something. My first playthrough, I just was like, I don't know what that means. But my second one, I got a little bit more intentional. Like, okay, this must mean something. And that's when I started taking screenshots and what ultimately became a folder on my desktop with about 100 different screenshots in this game. And you learn that pretty shortly after all of those rooms, usually I would say within like 20 to 30 floors, you'll come across a room that has the exact same number of tiles that those brands do. And they're really good about communicating the first one, because the first one you come across is in the shape of the first brand. Like, you need to only have remembered that shape and you'll be able to identify the room when you come into it. And you just need to lift up one tile. You need to lift up the staircase. And suddenly these things fill in on the side of your screen.
Yeah.
And it's still not clear what to do. But then when you drop down, you learn like, oh, okay, there's more to it. And you open up a treasure chest and you get your first of the other items in the game, which blew my mind because to now, at this point I've played the game 5, 6, 7 hours, and I'm like fully sure that the rod that we're using is the only item available. And now I'm like, oh, that was the first item of who knows how many.
Mm-hmm. I did not figure out the brand thing by myself. And I never made the connection that the murals that you see have the same number of tiles as those, seemingly empty rooms. I just thought the game was giving me a break in those seemingly empty rooms. So I did not figure this out by myself. And I used a guide for every brand room because I would look at those, other than the first one, and maybe the second one. I would look at most of them and just be like, I don't even know where to start with this thing, especially as they get harder later. And like the last couple of them are insane. So I didn't figure that out by myself. One of the discoveries that I did make by myself is that in the level with the tree, there is nothing blocking you from going down to where the inventory and like the UI thing at the bottom of the screen is. And when I figured out that you could walk down there, but also pick up that stuff, that blew my mind. And for a while, it was just like a curious thing because I didn't figure out how to use it for a while. Because I think when I first figured it out, I was voided, so I couldn't. Well, you can't swap HP. There was maybe I didn't have any crickets or something like that. So I was like, I think I can give myself more HP, but why do I need more HP? maybe I can give myself more crickets, but I have to get down to a higher floor. And then like, I don't know, I forgot or something like that. But
Yeah.
I did crash my game a few times by just messing around with that. And that was a fun thing to discover.
Yeah, you can grab the wrong part of the UI and the game basically just shuts to desktop. The game loves shutting down to desktop.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
There's like 7 different ways in the game to just shut it off. But I don't even remember now off the top of my head how you do it. But the first time I discovered that, it was completely on accident because it was in one of the later levels. I was in like, I think the early 200s or something. And I was just trying to solve a puzzle. And without even thinking about it, I like didn't even process that was the UI. I just built a bridge to like go around and push a block. And there was this moment where I was like, wait, I'm standing on top of my cricket symbol right now. Like, I shouldn't be here. And I ended up grabbing, I want to say it was the level one, like the 10s and the 1s place of the level number. And I maybe finishing the level at that point. I'm not sure, but I did something then that results in you like exploring this weird empty void. Did you ever get to that place?
I did. There's a couple of those places I got to. There's one that's like a white void where there is, I want to say there's like some hazard that's like showing up on the screen, and you have like a limited time to solve the puzzles in there before like that thing catches you. And if it does, you die or something like that. But you get to like the end screen of that is just an end screen. Like there's nothing to do there. You just have to like die and leave, I guess. I got to that one. There was another one I got to where I think I was playing as Lily, and it's like I'm on top of a portrait of Gray. Like it's a puzzle, and you had to like rearrange it to like make this picture of Gray holding Lily when she was a baby or something like that. But I couldn't figure that out either, and I died. I think I jumped in a pit or something, and that was over. So there's lots of weird voids that you end up in.
This is the Void Stranger thing, because neither of those are the one that I was talking about, strangely enough. I never got to the weird white one, so that one is complete news to me. I did get to the one where you build a picture, and the way I did it, I thought that it was part of my kind of like true ending route, but anyways, the one that I got, it's just a completely black screen when you're in it. And there's this sort of like very faint, like humming noise. And it's a little bit like, Zelda Lost Woods or something, where you're moving screen to screen, but they all look identical. So you don't really know how you're moving. But as you start to move around, you realize that if you move in certain directions, the sound is getting louder and louder. So you're sort of navigating blindly, moving towards the audio source. And ultimately, when I like got to the source of that sound, it was like this giant, it looked like an egg from Alien or something like that, like this giant egg that had opened up and clearly birthed something at some point in the past. And I'm pretty sure, again, in typical Void Stranger fashion, I interacted with it and I talked with it, and then the game just shut down to desktop. And when I booted it back up, I was back in the level before I had done that. So I'm not sure if that is like part of a larger mystery, or it's just like a fun Easter egg for messing with the UI in the specific way I did.
So I don't think I did that. So there's that. Speaking of those other items, so I got the memory item by just beating the game with Gray, I think. That's the one that lets you like talk to the rocks and the statues and stuff like that. I think that's how I got that. And I don't remember if I got the sword by doing a mural or if I got it by just looking up the brand and putting it in at the brand input screen. Because you learn like you can kind of customize like what items do I want to start with? What character do I want to start with at that like brand input screen at the beginning, which is a cool way to do it, to be like, I want to play as this character with these items and, maybe some other modifiers and stuff. And I've never seen a game do something like that. Like when that brand screen came up the first time I played it, I was like, what I don't even understand. Okay, I'll make a brand, I guess. And then I never, like, did you ever figure something out to do with your brand that you made?
No,
Okay.
I was never able to like find a place to put it. I don't know about you, but I just made mine a smiley face. I felt like I had no choice. And I never ended up using it to any purpose, but I agree with you that the way that you can put other brands in at that section is really smart. It's one of the like many gentle ways that the game like starts to roll back the hostility a little bit, because it's so harsh at first where you're learning, like they teach you all the ways to mess up first, and then they teach you all the ways to like navigate more easily after that, once you've like proven you're willing to do it. And that is one of them. So when earlier we're saying that like, it just wipes your save, it's like, well, that's true, but it's also going to give you these tools that you can start the game with. And these items, when you have all of them, trivialize a lot of the puzzles or significantly reduce the difficulty of a lot of puzzles, especially the one that lets you hop over a single pit safely is like you can shoot through the first 50, 60 floors like it's Mario 1-1 at that point. Yeah,
exactly. Now, did you find the wings and the sword just by like experimenting with those murals?
So that's why I say I think I had the ideal playthrough that the developers wanted, because my second run, so my first non-void run with Gray, I found the cube, the wings, and the sword all back to back. So I was able to get to the end of that run without a guide because I was playing on easy mode, basically. Like I was skipping half of every puzzle and getting to like manipulate things. So I was feeling like I was on my high horse at that point. I was like, oh man, Void Stranger's going buttery smooth for me. I'm loving this.
That's cool. I did not know about the wings or the sword until I played as Sif. And
which
Sif starts with those, and I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. And then I thought like, well, those are taking up those spaces down in the, the UI where everything was empty when I was playing as Gray and Lily. So I need to look up how to get those as Gray. And it was like, oh, the murals, those things that I like didn't know anything about, that's what those are for. Yeah. So I did not figure that out.
Yeah, it was really nice for me going into Lily's run, because you can still put those brands in and start Lily's run with all of them. And so I was like, the puzzles were harder, but it was also compensating back in the other direction because I had all of these opportunities to make them easier for myself. So that part was nice. But yeah, that would be rough to not find them earlier. And you said you didn't find them until the Sif run. Folks listening, like that's like your fourth playthrough of the game in like an optimal setting. Like you're going to have probably 2 as Gray, then you're going to play as Lily, and then you're going to play as Sif. So
And Lily's is hard mode. It's like, it would be like if you just turned on a hard mode modifier and you did like the hard version of every single puzzle in the game. That's Lily's route. And I didn't have the upgrades. I didn't know about them. So I think I texted you and I was like, man, this like, I don't want to spoil it, but the game just got way harder and I don't think I can do this. And so I did like, I was also afraid of going voided because now because I just beat the game with Gray not being voided. So I was like, oh, now I have to do hard mode and not get voided. Like, this is bad. Because the first is like room 2 after you pick up the scepter introduces those, or it has one of those little orbs that follows you around, or like the diamonds or whatever they are. And like, so the easiest room in the game had that enemy in it. I was like, oh, fuck, this is not good. So I used a guide. Like I tried for like 15 or 20 levels in Lily's route. And then I was like, that's when I pulled up. Someone made this incredible guide on Google Sheets.
I'm sure I followed the same one.
Yeah. It is ridiculously good down to the input. So I literally didn't look at the screen. I would just be like, if I press these buttons in the right order, I will get to the end of the puzzle. And I did all of Lily's route like that because I just didn't know about the things to make the game easier. And those puzzles were too hard. So, and then by that point I was like, there's probably going to be more after this, or I'll see the end of the game, because what I thought was the end was not even close to the end. So here we are.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I played through half of Lily's Root, I guess, on my own. And at some point, even with all those tools, the puzzles get very hard. The later, like, hard mode Lily Root puzzles do start to approach the, like, there's only one solution to this puzzle type of design, especially some of the later levels where you have, like, the shadow copies of yourself that are following behind you that mean, like, your options for movement are extremely limited. But yeah, I got probably a little over halfway through Lily's run, and I was not void yet, and I was losing ground, and I was like, I don't know if I have the heart to get to the end of this run and learn that I have to have done this one unvoided as well. Yeah. And I was like, this is probably like, this has got to be so close to the end of the game. Like, it would make so much sense that, like, you do this run through the hard mode puzzles and then you're done. So that's when I started following a guide to get to the end of that run. And then you're like, oh, this isn't even the end of the game. This is like the halfway point of the game.
Yeah. So after Lily's Root, then you do the route as Sif, which is easy mode because Sif has all the upgrades. Then after you beat the game as Sif, you have one more route to do if you know what to do. Otherwise, like, if you don't know what to do, you might be just doing the shit over and over and over again until you figure it out. So did you figure out on your own how to go to floor 0?
I would say yes and no. So at that point, I was doing less consulting of that guide, and I think you had finished it by that point. So you were kind of like my nudge in the right direction. And I forget what you said. I laid out like a whole bunch of stuff I had like half figured out, and you sort of nudged me like, oh, you might have said go to floor 0 or something. You said something where immediately clicked in my brain like, oh, I should have known to try that. So what you can do is, one of the ways you learn once you discover you can mess with the HUD is that you can swap around any of the tiles in the HUD that have numbers. Most importantly, your kind of like grasshopper count and the floor number, the last 2 digits of the floor number, because you can't take the first 2 because it will break the game. But you can swap the last 2, which means you can be on floor 100, and if you've somehow managed to get 99 grasshoppers, that's not really realistic, but as an example, you can grab that, swap those 2, and when you go into the stairs, you will now be on floor 199, and you've jumped ahead 99 levels. Yeah. And inverse to that, that's one of the only ways to go back up floors that you've already gone down, which you sometimes need to do. So you'll occasionally be getting towards the bottom and be like, I think I might have missed what I need to do. And you'll like, I was like throwing myself into a pit to like get my grasshopper count down to the right number so I could swap it in and get to the floor I needed. But kind of like what feels like a logical conclusion to that thought is you can then swap the 0 counter on the grasshoppers. You know, I have the 0 life. I have no lives left with the floor number, and jump back to a floor before the one that you started on, which turns out to be kind of like one of the ultimate mysteries. Has kind of like a Super Metroid defeat the 4 bosses statue going on. Yeah.
So 2 things there. First of all, the using the UI to skip forward is how speedruns work in this game. And I watched a wild speedrun of someone beating this non-voided in like a ridiculously short amount of time, where they just, memorize the optimal solution to every puzzle that you have to do. They did some brands in there to get some items. It was like starting from a fresh game file to the true ending in like, just making it up, like 12 minutes or some shit, like just ridiculous, because they've mastered all the ways to skip around the dungeon. So figuring that out. Oh, and then also using those statues with the, it's a certain type of statue. If you jump into it, it will push you forward however many crickets you have. It will push you that many floors forward.
That took me a long time to figure out, because for a long time, it just felt arbitrary to me. I was like, these are jumping me ahead some number of floors. It wasn't until like really close to the end of my playthrough that I realized that I could control that.
I figured it out because they consume your crickets when you do that. So I would like do it and I would skip like 40 floors ahead and be like, oh, this is awesome. I'm going to be at the end in no time. And then I'd pick up a cricket in the next room and I would jump in again and it would skip me one floor forward and be like, oh, well, that sucks. What did I do? Oh, okay. I see what's going on here. So I used that on the run where I was trying to do all the bosses to get the ultimate scepter, because I think in that run, you need to skip ahead where you can to be efficient, but then you also have to go back at some point. And that's where the other statue that we haven't talked about yet, the one that resets you to floor 1, which was a rude fucking awakening the first time I figured out. And then like the second time it happened to me when I just like fell in a pit and didn't realize that statue was next to it, you know, and it resets you from floor like 200 back to floor 1. And I was like mad when that happened.
Yeah, I was furious. And then so rude. So yes, you get to the statue that literally starts the game over. And in hard mode, in Lily's route, there's like 5 floors where they just sort of like almost nonchalantly put one of those statues above the staircase. And those rooms are usually not that hard. And so if you're playing through, especially when I was going through that first half without a guide, you realize that you're not like parsing every single tile in every level. Like as long as I see the route to the stairs, my brain just kind of starts running towards it. So there was, I think, 2 different times where I was like dozens or over 100 levels deep. And just because I wasn't paying attention, I walked into one of those statues and started my game over. And that was like another strong impetus where I was like, I'm not paying close enough attention to ever get through this game. I'm going to need to consult a guide to know when these statues appear.
That happened to me on so if you do all the boss fights, and I want to talk about them in a second, but if you do all the boss fights on like the quest to open that chest to get the ultimate scepter thing, after you do that, and you get the ultimate scepter and you go to the brand room where you have to pick up all the tiles and you fall off and it takes you to like the beginning of the next dungeon. That room has one of those right in front of a staircase. So it's like you went through all the stuff. And then if you just see, oh, thank God, staircase, it resets you back to level 1. The only good part about that, and it's like, you know, obviously an intentional choice, is that doesn't end your run. It just sends you back to floor 1. So it's not like a reset, but you do get sent back to floor 1, which you do need to use sometimes. But when it happens, when you're not wanting it to happen, it's like, come on.
Yeah, it is so painful. And for me, it wasn't clear. It took me a while to like understand that the game was drawing a distinction between I've reset you to floor 1 and I've reset your save, because you can do both of those accidentally, basically, in this game. And so it took me a little while to realize that was something I should be using as a tool to navigate around the floors and not just something that I should universally be avoiding.
Yeah. I guess if I was playing the game optimally without a guide, that would have been one more complication to like, you know, keep an eye on. Like when you start a room, identify the bad statues and like don't mess with those. When I got to like the harder parts of the game, I just couldn't solve the puzzles by myself. So that wasn't a huge issue because I was just using a guide to see what the game had left for me. And that kind of really started when I was doing this quest to get the upgraded scepter, because I wouldn't have figured out, like I got to floor 0 by myself, but then I was like, what is all this, you know? And I don't even remember the ways to get to the places where you have to fight all the bosses. Like there's one where it's like the big head sitting in the room and you have to kill the head. It asks you to kill it. And you're like, all right, sure. So you do that. There's one where you have to kill Tail, which you need. I think you need the special scepter to do that, to build yourself a platform up to. Maybe you don't. I don't remember. But you need a hint to like bump into something 26 times and then sit or some weird shit like that. And like a rock will tell you that or something, you know?
Yeah, and I got that hint and I don't even remember where I got. At some point I just had a bunch of notes that were like, here's things I've learned or need to try, and I don't even remember what the end result of all of them were. But yeah.
What'd you think of the boss fights? I did not expect this game to have boss fights in it, but there's a handful.
I think they're actually really well done. Like, I was expecting, because in a very early story scene, you do like a turn-based RPG battle as Gray. And so you're like, okay, this game's having some fun and like mixing genres. So in my brain, when it came time for any like moment like that, that's how they would do it. But you end up doing the boss fights, almost all of them, in like tile puzzle mode. And even though they're designed with like actually a certain level of randomness to them, they all felt like to me the perfect difficulty. And it was actually kind of nice because for some of the later ones, I was already in like full on guide mode, like tell me what to do. And that was one of the few chances for me to like minimize that browser tab and be like, okay, this is just me versus the boss now, and I can go at it and have some fun.
Same here. Yeah. There was the centipede boss, which I thought was, kind of tough to figure out, how it works and things like that. But I had a great time with that one. And that one's in the, like, you take a step, it takes a move, kind of like turn-based format. And there's another, I think the spider boss is like that too, where it's like spider and then flies shooting out from the sides of the room. I think that's also in that like turn-based mode. There's another one that's in like real time, which is like feels wrong whenever that, puzzle section of gameplay turns into like real time and you can walk outside of a grid and all of that stuff. So
it becomes Undertale in that moment very much. It's like suddenly you're just like dodging around in this very limited space. And it shouldn't feel surprising because every run of like a new file starts with you doing a floor and a half of free movement. Like, that the game isn't like strictly adhering to this tile grid, but because it like really never messes with that again, when some system comes back up at the very end of the game that does mess with it, you're like, oh, I was not expecting this at all.
Yeah. And I like you thought, okay, puzzle section and then story section with JRPG turn-based combat like that first one. And it never happens again until the very end of the game. And neither of those are like serious battles. Like they're both presented like that, but they're not. I think there's one against the prince too, but they're not like you have to beat this boss fight in order to continue the story, I think.
As far as I know, it almost feels like none of them can even be lost. Like it might be that you need to like use the right moves, but it a lot of times felt like I could do whatever I wanted to in those turn-based fights, and then the same story would progress onwards, or at least I always got the outcome I sort of expected to happen. Yeah,
same here. So the next like big discovery is getting the upgraded Void Rod, which you can pick up as many tiles as you want, which like if you have the sword and the fairy wings, and you can just pick up all the tiles you want and just like make yourself a bridge, no problem, to the end of the levels. That's this game's version of ultimate empowerment. Feels good.
Yeah. By the time you get that, and for me it was very, very late. I mean, it kind of by definition has to be with the order of the runs. By the time you get that, it felt like I could just do whatever I wanted at that point. And you've learned so many other systems by then to navigate up and down the floors that it's like the last puzzle piece you need to be like, okay, I can just do whatever I want, go wherever I want. I'm the boss of this now. Yep.
Until you're not, because so you did the last layer of DIS, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you try that without a guide?
So like the very final set of dungeons or the very final boss fight?
The set of puzzles.
I think I did maybe one or two without a guide, but at that point I was like, no, these are so hard that I just need to look it up. They're fun because they kind of mess with the rules of puzzles a little bit. They get a little bit more like metagamey for some of them, where you have to like pay attention to what one floor is laid out like to solve another floor, or you need to like do unintuitive things like open and close the pause menu several times to solve one of them. And so that part's kind of neat, but most of them I had to just guide my way through.
Yeah, I took one look at the first puzzle and like, because I think throughout the course of, no, that's a lie. I was going to say throughout the course of getting the scepter, you'll go to a room that gives you 99 crickets. So I was like full of crickets, but during one of those boss fights, it's the spider one. If you die once, you get automatically voided, which is again, just like the game kicking you in the shins just for fun. So I was voided by then. So I wasn't afraid of, actually, no, that's a lie. I was afraid of dying because I had done all of this shit to get to this point. I was like, if I lose a run, does this ultimate rod go away and I have to go do all those boss fights again? Like, you never know with this game.
Yeah.
So I think you had written somewhere in the notes, and I wasn't sure if we had mentioned it, but like, there are many points in the game where you are like, the game's encouraging you to go explore and try stuff, but you are feeling discouraged to try stuff because if you get, slapped on the wrist too many times, you're just going to stop doing it, or you're going to feel uneasy about doing it.
Yeah, there was a couple, like, in hindsight, I imagine very silly examples of that, but one of them was, as you start to get those items we talked about, like the sword and the wings and things like that, it opens up this like section in your menu where you can turn them on and off, because on some rare occasion it would be handy to like not have one of them enabled in order to like help you navigate the way you need to. And they're just labeled burdens.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like notice that menu as soon as I got an item. So sometime later I noticed that suddenly there's this thing called burdens in my menu. And I was too afraid to toggle it because I was like, if I turn this on or off or whatever, it's not like, is this going to, nullify the last 2 hours of me running down through these floors or not? And so I didn't even bother messing with them until like I was in a very safe environment. Like I had just started a new run, floor one. I can't undo anything.
Well, your intuition was right, because I think one of the criteria for getting to this ending dungeon is you have to have all the burdens on. So like, because you can't solve these puzzles without the sword and the wings and all that stuff like that. So it's the game making sure you have all of those things. But if you happen to have turned them off in the menu, maybe the game would have kicked you back to floor one or something like that. So yeah, you never know. And like, there is a certain point where I'm like, I'm afraid to die, even though I'm in voided mode. Void mode taught me earlier that it's okay to die, but now I'm in this weird new dungeon. I don't know what's going on here. And the game has also taught me that it's going to punish me sometimes for experimenting. So like there was one time when it might have been the cricket warp statues. It was like there was an NPC or a rock or something that like hinted like, hey, fall down the hole in front of that statue. And there was like something else in that room that I wanted to do, but I was like, okay, it told me I'll go jump in the hole and see what happens. And it warps me away from that room. And now I can't do the thing that I was in that room to do in the first place. And I was like, come on, like what the, like, I get like you just taught me how that worked. Now I know how those statues work, but like, couldn't you have done that in a room with nothing else of incident,
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's why I ended up taking so many screenshots and like, they're all labeled like B193 secret exit question, like mural never solved, things like that. It became so ridiculous that it got to the point where like I was so simultaneously afraid and conspiracy brained with like, this game is always 2 steps ahead of me. When you change the color palettes in the menu for some reason, the names of the colors are like starred out other than the first letter of the color. And I was fully convinced at one point, I'm like, changing the color palette is going to become relevant to the story or to solving or navigating these environments. And so every now and again, I would not know what to do somewhere, and I would go start flipping color palettes to be like, is this going to suddenly like reveal tiles that weren't visible before or something like that? And at least in all the points I tried it, it never was the case. I suppose it still could be, but that's where your head gets.
Yeah. It does make you question, because it's already established it's doing meta things with UI and stuff like that. So like, fucking around with some things in the menu. And like you said, there is a puzzle that's like pause and unpause the game 6 times. Or there's one that's like, bump into this thing 26 times and then wait 26 seconds. And, really just weird stuff like that. So anything could be a puzzle solution for sure.
Yeah, it's a very mess with you type of game. Even down to, this is like a kind of non sequitur, but sort of related. Really neat thing that the game does that I've never seen before. You said you never checked the Steam achievements for the game, but right at the start of the game, there's only one achievement in this game, and it's just a pendant. Right at the start of the game, it's Gray's pendant. So you start the game basically as soon as the first cutscene's done, that achievement pops and you have that achievement. When you finish Gray's route and you now are playing as Lily, Steam takes that achievement away from you, which I didn't even know was possible.
Yeah, same.
But the achievement disappears, and then for, a story scene later, she receives that pendant, and as soon as you receive it, then it repops the trophy for you again and gives you the pendant back. And I was and that's like a game's messing with you on like a whole other layer that I wasn't expecting, so threw me off even more.
Yeah, absolutely. When it took the achievement away, I was like, kind of like you said, like, can you even do that? Like, did I screw something up? Like, was I cheating? Am I banned or something like that?
I was gaslighting myself. I was like, did I ever have that achievement?
Yeah.
I thought I did, but maybe I never earned it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the story, and then we can kind of wrap up with what happens at the end. Talk about like what comes up and how we feel about that. The events of the story, I will say, I was always intrigued by what was going to come up next, and the story went in some cool directions that I thought. But for a while, and like even right now, I'm still not positive on what happened in the story in this game. But the story of, Gray losing Lily, Lily is like, if I remember right, the prince had a bargain with those demons from the Void dungeon, and Lily was kind of sacrificed as like a soul to go in to help the prince fulfill his bargain or something like that. And that's why, like, I didn't know for a while that in the dungeon you're playing as Gray. I didn't put that together for quite some time. And so Gray just, I don't know, has a feeling that Lily's down there, and that's why she's going through this. And you find some cool stuff in the dungeon, like there are those NPC type things that mirror your movements, but if you're ever able to talk to them, those are also Gray, which I thought was weird.
Yeah, and they like encourage you on. They're like, keep pushing forward. You've got this. You also come across a bunch of other like random other people that it's very easy to accidentally shove into a pit, but you don't necessarily have to.
And I don't know if there's a reason, like, I don't know if you're rewarded for saving them, because there's like a couple levels where there's like a snake moving toward one of them, and you have to block the snake from getting to them. Like, I don't know if there's a reward for saving those people or not.
I don't know if there's a really tangible reward. I did get a couple of like images in the credits following like the diss ending of one or two of the people I had met in that route and not pushed into the void. So I don't know if it's like they'll show you like the happy lives of people that you saved from certain doom.
Yeah. So along those lines, what's your take on like what this dungeon is? Because that's one of the things that like they give you like most of the answer to, I think, but not the whole answer, I don't think. And I can go first if you want.
I'll give you my like blurry theory and you can hopefully maybe correct it or clarify it for me. Maybe. But it seems like sometime in the distant past, there was some sort of, this all started as some sort of like technology based, like, I don't know, research station or, you know, server farm or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And at some point in the past, something happened to like, basically like an apocalyptic event of some kind.
Yeah.
And it becomes one of those things where like the system doesn't know the humans are gone and just sort of keeps running in perpetuity.
Yeah.
But then that also seems to tie to the various void lords that you meet are also like the demons also seem to have some relation to wanting to protect the system, which I don't know if that is like a, you know, like they have founded this place and it's like a religious item to them, or if they had a connection to it previously. I'm not super sure.
Yeah, so definitely on the same page with it being like an old research facility. The game mentioned that the records stopped 70,000 years ago. And, you know, like you said, some cataclysm or something probably caused that. And it's an interesting theory that the demons that you deal with, and then like there's some that you don't deal with, but you just like hear about, could have been like researchers there or some kind of like programs or something like that that are there to protect it. Like you said, or maybe you didn't say this, I remember. There's one, I got the sense, I think there was one part where they said that the demons are there fulfilling a purpose that they don't remember anymore. And they're like they're just like going through doing their job, but they don't know what. And they're trying to figure that out at the same time. And there's like this other thing who like is giving them instructions, but won't give them enough instructions. So like you're in the dark for a while and it seems like they know what's going on, but then you get to a point where they don't really know what's going on either. When you get like, you know, conversations between some of those characters together. I think that's the one before you start playing as Sif, where it's like Sif talks to another character and then they're like, oh, fuck, B is still in there. And so Sif's like, all right, I'll go get B. And then Sif goes out into the dungeon to find him.
Yeah. And that's all complicated too, because there's like, they reference like some sort of tension or like, I think they call it like a civil war or something between different characters. And so it seems like they had either competing purposes or like some of them wanted to break off and like stop doing whatever it is that this computer system has been having them do. And so there's tension between certain like groups of these demons. And I didn't follow it to the point where like, I followed enough to be like, oh, this is fun. This is cool. But I was not following the particulars. And then very, very late game, there's like a reveal like, haha, it was me all along.
Right.
And I didn't even know. I was like, who are you? Like, should this be a dramatic reveal?
The little bat demon that gives you the fruit that turns you voided turns out to be like the big bad. Its name is Lev. And this is one of those parts where it's like, I think this game wants you to care about these characters. And I didn't really, you know, like this. I was always interested in what was going to come up. But like when you had a conversation with two of the demon lords, or, you know, one of the demon lords is in trouble, I didn't care about that in the same way that I cared about, you know, hoping Gray and Lily could reunite at some point and that Gray would find her or something like that. And then there's like these weird fake out endings where it's like Gray gets there, but Lily's pregnant. Not, however that happened. And like, you can't take both of them out. Like, one has to stay behind. So Gray takes the baby out. Like, I was more invested in that storyline. And like, so for as cool as the revelation that like, oh, this is an ancient high-tech facility and the things you thought were trees are actually not trees. And the things you thought were murals are like covering up computer units. Like, those reveals are cool, but like, maybe I just didn't have enough, or maybe I didn't think enough about it, but those parts just didn't hit the same.
Yeah, I think that like goes to, if you're the type of person where like this is your one game and you play it and like scrutinize it for months or years, like it probably does have all that information buried in places we never saw, or like is more clear, or it's just like the type of game that's like fun to put a wiki together and like piece all this disparate information together. It was funny because so at the end of the Gray route, you get to the end and you face this like tribunal, this like set of judges that are basically like, we've deemed your soul worthy, we grant you one wish. And it's like a be careful what you wish for type of thing, because they say like, oh, you can free one soul. And so you choose Lily, and that's when they reveal Lily's pregnant, and Gray has to choose, do I save the baby or do I save Lily? And Gray actually chooses the baby. So every time we've been saying the Lily route, that's a different Lily from the original Lily. And it's funny because the game does then the same fake out a second time, where when Lily gets to the bottom, she faces those same judges, and she wishes like for her mother to be at peace. And she's referring to Gray, but her real mother is other Lily. And so when she wishes for her mother to be at peace, she like actually is now freeing Lily, who remained imprisoned after Gray, to be free again. So both times the characters end up like not getting what they wished for in a direct way.
Yeah. I also enjoyed the story. So after you beat it with Gray and Gray takes baby Lily out of the dungeon, there is a bit of a story of like, they're not in fantasy RPG world anymore. They're in like the modern day. So Gray is like this fish out of water trying to raise a baby, and like Lily is like grows up in it. So she adjusts better to like modern society. And so I thought that storyline was like really interesting. And like every time we had a scene where like there's one scene where like Gray freaks out and says like, you're turning out just like your mother or something like that. And Lily's like, oh, wait, my mother, not you? Why did you say that? So like when we have scenes like that, I thought that was really cool. And I think it's at the beginning of the Lily route too, where she goes home to visit Gray. This is all told in nonlinear order, so I'm getting the order mixed up. But I guess at the end of this story, Lily goes to visit Gray, finds the pendant in an envelope, and then like a pit to the dungeon opens up, and that's when you jump in and you start her route. So like all this to say, I thought that storyline was like pretty interesting, fun to follow, setting up some themes that you can follow along with, this person, fish out of water, isekai'd into the future, trying to raise a baby, stuff like that. Like I thought that was interesting, but it just turns out to be like just a chapter along the way rather than what I thought it was going to. I thought this was just going to be a story about these characters together, when it turns out it's a little bit about that, but it's also about this whole other like society and, setting of this future place. And I just couldn't really follow that.
Yeah. But I thought the same thing, where I was like, okay, this is just going to be like it's nice fantasy side story. By the end, I was grateful for those scenes, because it was like something grounded that like I can actually follow along with like character progression and like, seeing them at different points in their lives, as opposed to me trying to like keep track of a bunch of different like names and sprites and, like their different layers and like places that they live and floors that are tied to them and their brand. Like it got very hard to keep track of.
Yeah, and then there's a point where I think, if I remember right, baby Lily gets down to the bottom of the dungeon, asks for peace for her mother, and like the demon lord that she's talking to, I wrote down that the mask cracks and you see that it's Mother Lily behind the mask there. So it's like, whoa, but you get kicked out. You get kicked out to the ending card and then you start over again. But all this to say, you do get the reunion at the end of Gray and Lily. And it depends, I think it depends who you beat the game with, actually, like beat the final dungeon. You can beat it as Lily or as Gray. And that will change who's in this reunion at the end with Mother Lily. So it could be Gray and Princess Lily reuniting finally, or it could be baby Lily reuniting with her real mom at the end, depending on who you do the route with. I never crossed my mind to try and do the hard mode version of this. So Gray was the one for me.
Yeah, same for me too. I wanted to avoid the hard mode. I'd like to tell myself there was maybe a little piece of my brain that was like, it feels more appropriate to close this story out as Gray too. But in reality, yes, I wanted the normal levels.
If you didn't do this and like the canon version of events was that Gray went through all of this torment to try and find Lily and then just ends up getting lost in the void and never, never has an ending to her story, that would be pretty tragic.
Yeah, pretty sad for Gray in the end. Although, I don't know, you also, kind of getting into the ending, you also, I think, learn that Gray is one of the demons at the end. So, like, they're sort of like signified by all having horns. Mm-hmm. It's like a way to keep track of them. And when you reach that final ending, Gray has like a transformation and she like loses all their clothes and gets like a stone embedded in her chest, and she also gets horns. So I think the implication is that she is like one of them or a relative to one of them.
She merges with one of them because the demon Lev bursts out of the little imp thing that gave you the fruit, and you have like one of those JRPG fights with it, and Gray loses. And then this other, because this Lev is trying to use the power of Dis to rule the world or whatever it wants to do, demon shit. And then Gray loses the fight, and one of the other demons called Ad merges with Gray, and that's when Gray turns into this like demon thing, and then she combines with Lily to turn into the butterfly thing, which you then do that shoot 'em up section, which shouldn't have come out of nowhere, knowing the developer's history with Zero Ranger, but came out of nowhere for me, where I was like, oh, we're doing a shoot 'em up section now. In my head, I was like, I hope this is good, not putting the pieces together. And I asked my some friends of mine who really like shoot 'em ups, like, what's the reputation of Zero Ranger? And people are like, it's great. It's one of the best out there. So these people know what they're doing with this. Now, of course, this is more of like a story thing than like a hardcore shoot 'em up, final boss or something like that.
Yeah, it's not quite a victory lap, but it's close. I certainly took a bunch of hits and I was still able to get through, to the point where I was like unsure that it was even possible for me to lose. But at the same time, I guess I should ask you, because you go through the shoot 'em up and you're like in outer space, you're shooting down like a bunch of human ships and stuff.
Yeah, it's like Space Army and shit.
Yeah. And so you get through all that and you kind of get up to Lev, or what I assume is Lev, yeah. And you like fight this version where there's like a bunch of different weak points. You kill that, and then it goes into this like legit like bullet hell mode where you're just controlling like this orb.
Yeah.
And you're like navigating through all these bullets, and you got like this little sparkle coming off you that will diffuse some of the bullets around you. And I think you're trying to navigate to like the core of that thing spitting out all the bullets. I ended up getting hit by one of the bullets.
So did I.
And I like went like black hole supernova, but I still got an ending, and it seemed enough of an ending where I was like, I don't think I'm going to play all those hard levels again and do the shoot 'em up section again just to have one more shot at this. Same. To see if there's hopefully not another like route or two locked behind that.
Yeah. So I did the exact same thing. I died in that section where you're controlling the little black diamond because I didn't know what to do. Like it just kind of puts you there and like, okay, I can't shoot. I don't know what to do. And then like, I touch something and you die instantly. This part, they should have signaled better what you were supposed to do. If they're going to pull you out of shmup mode and put you into something like vaguely related, but it's different. Your goal is different. And I just, didn't know what to do. So I died, and that was the end of my game. There is like, if you look on the wiki, the guide for this ending, there is pages and pages of stuff after this. Like more boss fights, more cutscenes. There's a ton of stuff after this. And so to have it, I think that once you get to this point, it should be a victory lap to the end. Give me the spectacle of the shmup part. Give me the ending cutscenes. It's one final kick in the shins to have this, to just one hit kill, kick into an ending. Yeah, and then you, like, if you go look on the wiki, there's pages and screenshots of like more boss phases and more cutscenes and stuff like that. And I saw this and I said the same thing as you. I'm like, I'm not doing this again. That was enough.
Yeah, it's like, even with all the knowledge you have, and even with a guide, it's still like an hour of like manipulating all the pieces to solve this ultimate mystery to even just get back here and have one more shot at it. So I was like, this felt like enough of an ending for me. This is like 9th time I've gotten an ending in this game. I think I'm pretty okay to call it here.
And the other part that made me okay with calling it is I read that the upgraded Void Rod is permanent unless you beat the game.
Oh,
so if you start, so I figured, I didn't check to see if I'm right or not, but I'm pretty sure I am. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone out there. But since I've got the ending, if I were to start a new game, I would have had to do all those boss fights to get the upgraded rod again, to go back to Dis's dungeon and then do all this other stuff. So it was like, man, I mean, I like the game and I do want to see what's at the end. I was compelled to come this far, even if I was just, reading that guide, keystroke by keystroke. This is it, though. I'm not going any further than this. So it's kind of a shame. And I don't agree with the decision to make it, especially with just how you start that section where you're controlling the little black diamond. And there's like seconds where I'm like weaving in and out of bullets, but I'm like, what am I even doing here? What am I supposed to? Oh, I got hit. Yeah. Oh, it's the end of the game now. Okay.
And there are parts of those bullets that you can't navigate through. And like I said, there's like a little emitter coming out of yours. So there must be like a timing and a dodging thing at the same time. But yeah, just a little bit too harsh for me to want to push through. Even though I like all of the like knowledge and information you have to combine to get to that point. And I do like that it's the type of game where if you booted it up for the first time, like you're saying with the speed runs, like with all of the knowledge on what to do, you could fast track on your first playthrough as Gray directly to this true ending. It still is, it's a little too harsh to punish me that deep in.
Yeah, for sure. So the ending is kind of sweet. I failed. So Gray and Lily fell out of the sky as like a shooting star, and then a cutscene shows Gray reading like a bedtime story to Lily about the stars. So I wasn't quite sure if that was, in the same timeline or if one of those was a dream or something like that. But at that point, it didn't really matter. It was just a nice, sweet ending.
Yeah, it was enough of like closure for me to feel okay with it. I do wonder if, because there's that shoot 'em up section and there's one or two other spots where the game like brings you into outer space or shows you views of outer space. Mm-hmm. I wonder if this is ultimately, if it is a connected story to Zero Ranger in some way, and if it's one of those things where if I had played that game first, I would see them drawing parallels between the two stories, like their version of the Remedyverse or whatever it is. But
yeah.
to me, they were kind of lost on me. They were cool scenes, but I was like, I'm not really sure what this is supposed to mean.
Yeah, I know they are connected in some way, but
Okay.
I don't know to what degree. Like I assume that the space army that you're shooting at in that last section is like something you're doing in Zero Ranger too. So probably like people who played Zero Ranger would like start that section and be like, oh fuck, it's Zero Ranger again. So yeah, I'm interested in playing Zero Ranger. I'm, there's no using a guide to get through a shmup. You have to you have to do it. So I'm not I will buy it and I will try it, but I'm not confident that I can actually beat that game to see how connected this is.
Yeah, if it's you have to play on hard mode and not lose a credit and never use bombs to unlock your opportunity to try the true ending route, it's like that might be a game where maybe I do take it to YouTube at that point.
Yeah. Well, in any case, they've set up like a really interesting world at the very least, and because Zero Ranger apparently also has, quote, more to it than meets the eye. It's not just a standard, shmup. So there's more stuff going on. I don't know to what degree. I don't know, anything else really, but I do know that System Erasure knows how to make an interesting game at the very least. And so I'm going to check out Zero Ranger sometime, but like, I can't wait to see the next thing they're working on. It's going to be weird. I can almost guarantee that.
Yeah. I mean, they've established a vibe for themselves that I'm very much down for. And I wonder if they feel at this point some obligation to keep changing the genre. I mean, to go from a shoot 'em up to a block puzzler is about as drastic a difference as you can make. So like, what's next? Is it a visual novel? Is it a simulation sports game? I'm ready to find out.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. It's interesting. It makes me think of like the developers of Rain World who, made another one of these games where there's like a ton under the surface for you to discover about that game. And then the new game they're working on is a racing game where, maybe they're not interested in continuing the cryptic game full of secrets. And maybe they're just like, hey, it would be cool to, make a soccer game or something like that.
Yeah, we want to put our feet up a little bit. Just design the one game and not hide, 2 or 3 other games in our game.
Exactly. Well, whatever it is, I'm up for it. Void Stranger was certainly an experience, and for all I like the metaphor we've been using, all the times I got kicked in the shins, I was still glad to have like played it and gone through and seen everything. Because even if I didn't get the top shelf Void Stranger experience, where like I think there are some people, like if you go on the subreddit for this game, there's people who like just ate it all up. Even if I didn't get that experience, I still, like I said, respect the hell out of this game and the developers for making something so dense and rich as this game is.
Yeah, I end it on a very positive note. Like I would always give the caveat and like prepare people for how their time is going to get spent. But at the end of the day, I would definitely recommend people check it out. It is a game worth experiencing for sure.
You just reminded me, like, I feel this way about Rain World. Have you played Rain World?
No, I haven't yet.
Okay. I feel this way about Rain World. It's the same type of game. Rain World is full of unfair bullshit, but now that I'm through it, I can look back on it and just be like, I made it through. And like when I see someone, in the Discord playing Rain World and complaining about the unfair bullshit, I can just laugh and be like, yep, I got through it. That's something that happened in my past, and I love that game. And, if we see people out there playing Void Stranger and be like, I can't believe it reset me to level 1 for just trying this thing, we can just be like, yeah, sucks, doesn't it? But it's a cool game.
Yeah. I feel your pain. Enjoy the next 30 hours of your life.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't stop playing it. So you'll be back.
Yep. It's only a matter of time.
Well, speaking of being back, this has been a great time, man. I appreciate you coming on and talking about Void Stranger with me. I can't wait till the next time we have you on the show here. Yeah, I appreciate you again. Thanks we're over 2 hours now, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really great time. Thanks for encouraging me to play a game that I wanted to play anyways. And yeah, appreciate the show, and I love what you do. So I was very honored to be asked to come on and be a guest. So yeah, I'll come back anytime. You just let me know.
For sure. Maybe Zero Ranger, maybe not. We'll figure something else out. But
yeah, we might need to taste that a little bit to see if it's in the cards.
Yeah. Come on the podcast and be like, well, I played 20 minutes and I suck. So fun podcast, everybody. But yeah, thank you again. And thank you to everyone who has listened to the end of the episode. We appreciate you very much. And a reminder that down in the episode description, there will be links to IndieQuest and Polykill and everything that Steve is doing, so you can go check them out. It's high quality stuff that's worth your time. And as always, tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.
Welcome to No Small Games, the indie gaming recap and review podcast. I'm Kate, also known as Cater Blossom.
And I'm Emily. You might also know me online as The Specific Egg.
And we met streaming and playing video games on Twitch.
At No Small Games, we combine our favorite genres to experience everything the indie game world has to offer and share it with all of you. We believe there are no small games, only small game studios.
Each episode, we'll choose one indie game that we each played separately and discuss our playthrough experience together.
The good, the bad, and our most memorable moments. We'll follow our recap with a review and announcement of which indie game will be featured on our next episode.
We invite you to play each game along with us and would love to hear from you about your playthrough experience.
Hey, Kate.
Hey, Emily.
I hope that No Small Games brings everyone some big fun.
Hey, you there! This is Nomad speaking. If you love retro video games and you're itching for some nostalgia, check out the Retro Wildlands podcast. In each episode, I'll use game music and sound to pull you into the gaming experience while I share my own thoughts and maybe a few memories. It's a great way to relive one of your favorite games or learn about a new one. Check out the Retro Wildlands podcast at superpodnetwork.com or wherever you listen to your podcast.